it boils down, Peter Foster, to two borders for 4 years. So, I mean, not to be glib, but having insisted that there wouldn't be any border at all, Boris Johnson's solution to the problem is apparently to create two.
That is one way of putting it, James. There's always been this intractable problem all the way through Brexit, which is how does the United Kingdom leave the EU's single market and customs union without creating a border in Ireland? And remember, the border in Ireland, it disappeared actually not with the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, but actually when we joined the single market in 1992. So the question has always been, how can we do that? And of course, from the Brexiteers, it's how can we find ourselves trapped, as they would see it, in the European Union over this border question? Now, Theresa May's answer was, well, let's all stay in the customs union until we can work it out. But the Brexiteers won't have that. So their answer, which they've put forward today, is, well, let's do a bit of both. Let's have Northern Ireland in the single market for in the single market for regulations, but not for customs, and we'll use some technology to sort of try and smooth over the difference. And unfortunately, the European Union and the Irish government particularly, I think, will say that's not going to fly.
Does the technology exist?
So technology exists in lots of ways to make borders faster and more simple. You can have big scanners. You can fill in your paperwork in advance all the time. I mean, look at the Norway-Sweden border. Norway is in the single market. It's highly aligned with the European Union. But you go to the Norway-Sweden border, and there's a socking great customs park there, where lorries queue up to check that they've not got Chinese garlic in the back as opposed to regulation Spanish garlic, for example. So technology can make things smoother, but it can't make borders disappear. And of course, in the Northern Ireland context, it's not just about border posts and the reflex that comes back from the trouble. It's about cost and friction. If you're a business on the other side of a border, you need time and money to have people to fill out all the customs forms. And if you've got 10 lorries in your fleet, James, and now each lorry spends 10 minutes or 20 minutes getting checks, then you need 12 lorries to move the same amount of stuff across the border, and then you need to do rules, orders and checks, etc. Now, in the Northern Ireland context, which voted to remain, and which, in the context of the Troubles, doesn't want to facilitate what it would see as an English Brexit, that is hugely problematic. That's the argument that the Irish government is making. There is no acquiescence to this border. So even if the technology exists, it doesn't produce the invisible border, which is the bedrock of the all-island economy, but more fundamentally, the peace settlement.
You write also that the plan effectively means that Northern Ireland would remain within large parts of the EU single market until at least 2025. Is that just a sort of form of backstop under a different name?
Well, it's not the Theresa May backstop, because remember that had the whole UK in it. So it's just Northern Ireland. So this is saying Great Britain.
And just sorry to interrupt you again. The point here, of course, is that the concession on allowing that to be extended to the whole of the United Kingdom was done at the United Kingdom's request and acceded to with some reluctance by the European Union.
Yes, indeed. Precisely to avoid the border in the Irish Sea, this from Theresa May's point of view. And the Europeans were reluctant because they're prepared to do some unique things on the Irish border, but not to have that as a Trojan horse, as David Davis was always trying to do, for the wider UK-EU relationship. And so they did, as you say, very reluctantly concede the all-UK, but that's not what Boris Johnson is requesting. Boris Johnson is saying that Northern Ireland on its own, so Great Britain has gone 2021, quick and dirty free trade deal with the EU. It's off buccaneering. It's doing trade deals with the United States, chlorinated chicken, whatever else we need to get these trade deals. But Northern Ireland is remaining aligned to the single market rules for agriculture and industrial goods, which is designed to help smooth the border. But it's not customs. And again, I pity the poor listeners to have to try and follow this stuff, but the customs is absolutely the cornerstone of how you know what is in a region. So that's, the EU maintain, and the British government doesn't accept this, that without the customs component, you can't create an invisible or a fully open border, as they call it.
I mean, you're very generous to care about my listeners' concerns, but they have been educating me on this issue, largely from the island of Ireland, for the best part of two and a half years. I mean, the impossibility of delivering sort of frictionless trade outside the single market and the customs union has been self-evident to most of them all along, but not apparently to the most senior politicians in this land. Is it churlish, Peter Foster, to point out that Boris Johnson said in February of 2016 that the Irish border would not be affected if the UK left the European Union?
Yeah, lots of people have said some things which make you wonder how. When I was starting out as a journalist, the Northern Ireland and the Troubles was on the front page of the newspapers day in, day out. And it does seem as if, collectively, our political establishment seems to have lost its institutional memory, both about Ireland and about Northern Ireland. And so I'm afraid not just Boris Johnson, but Theresa May before him have constantly, I think, failed to understand and appreciate how fragile the situation is in Northern Ireland, and how, some quite difficult choices need to be made about the kind of Brexit you can do whilst preserving stability in Ireland. I think the choices are quite limited in that, much more limited than this government certainly would accept.
And Jonathan Powell, one of the negotiators of the Good Friday Agreement, has suggested that this proposal would undermine its very basis. He went a little further and said that it looks like this is not a serious proposal, and suggested presumably it's simply trying to avoid a deal in order to get to no deal. Does that tally with your understanding of the facts?
I hesitate to say what's in the mind of Boris Johnson or David Frost. I think what you could say is that this deal cuts across very clearly everything that the European Union has been saying about the integrity of the single market, because you'd need all these customs derogations, these exemptions. And of course, Ireland doesn't want to be a backdoor into the single market. It doesn't want to be a second-class citizen in the single market. So it doesn't fly on that score. And the EU wants an open border, a fully open border, as Michel Barnier as well. Well, it doesn't tally on that score. So what I think you can say is that this plan cannot be reconciled with the previous statements that the EU have made consistently over the last 2 or 3 years. I think the strategy was always to use no deal to as it were, force a choice on the Irish, and more importantly on the EU, to say, look, either we have a no deal, and that leads to a trade border in Ireland in an abrupt and chaotic manner, or you agree to this deal, and we end up with a trade border, but after 14 months, a transition period, and you get your money, and you get your citizens' rights. And the sort of hope is that Angela Merkel will sidle up to Leo Varadkar and go, come on, Leo, we can't have a no deal over this. You better suck it up. Now, that just misunderstands the way the EU works, in terms of it's a collection of medium-sized countries who punch above their weight by a collective solidarity. Throwing the Irish to the wolves is a bad signal to send to everybody else in the collective, in the herd, as it were. But also, unlike, the EU does genuinely care about the single market. I see readouts of internal meetings, and you'd be amazed. The jokes that are made about, well, if this is the deal, I might go and open a business in Northern Ireland myself. I think the British system never understands the extent to which Angela Merkel really believes that the integrity of the single market is not worth damaging to help the Brits as a third country, as a non-EU member state, deliver Brexit. And so, I just feel that there's some big category errors made here. This whole thing about no deal. No deal can't be manageable for us, James, and yet so terrifying for the EU, they'd throw the Irish under the bus and the single market out the window as they went past. It's just logically fallacious, and I think they backed themselves into a corner. And as you say, with the Benn Act in place and an extension looking a legal fact, I think the EU is probably going to look at this. It's going to be polite, and then it's going to wait for the extension request and see where the chips fall politically in the UK.
Finally, Peter Foster, because I know there are many demands on your time this morning after this splendid scoop. Is it? To talk of negotiation, if this really is a take it or leave it offer from Boris Johnson, is ridiculous. There has been no negotiation, effectively speaking, and if this is a take it or leave it offer, there can't be any negotiation moving forward. So even the word negotiation shouldn't have been in the reportage of the last 6 months.
I guess if negotiation means give and take, there hasn't been a lot of give on the EU side, I don't think. The EU strategy here is very clearly not to have its fingerprints on a no deal, on an EU exit, on a hasty UK exit. The EU will continue to talk. It will continue to reiterate its red lines, but it will not, as we've just been saying, negotiate away the bedrock of the single market. So in that sense, I think it's probably not been a negotiation. It's been the UK proffering proposals which have long since been dismissed as wishful thinking in the hope that the EU would shift, and I'm not sure that's what's going to happen.